Hello travelers, and welcome back to another Architect's Forge. This time we will be looking at the War Augurs, the first of the officers that we're looking at for Mounthaven. This is the one that the card comes in the action pack, but the specific model for the generic War Augur is the limited edition model that it comes as part of the Mounthaven release bundle. But before we get into anything more, let's look at the lore of this model, as well as, the cool limited edition model will be on the screen. The War Augurs are a military group, almost all of them from the highest castes, who, with the declaration of the last war, have been informed by the forecasters of the details of the master plan. Thanks to this information, the War Augurs know in advance which battles are most important, and appear without warning to advise the dwarves who will participate in those battles. These appearances are dramatic because of their unexpectedness, since they do not usually announce their presence in advance. Furthermore, the hammer and the anvil, those dwarves leading the battles, will see their battle plan subject to the proposals made by the War Augur. They become the executors of the Augur's will. War Augurs provide enormous advantages. They know exactly where the combat is going to take place, when the enemy forces are going to appear, and the composition of their troops, down to the last buckle of their armor. Thus, they can plan their battle in advance to an incredible level of detail. Their knowledge of the master plan is vast and specific. However, once combat begins, the usual modus operandi of dwarven warbands remains, and the work of the War Augur ends. They do not give orders like a hetman would, or update their plans according to the enemy's actions like a strategos would. They have planned everything absolutely, everything that will take place during the battle. So, the War Augurs will lead the battle. Well, they don't lead. They advise the leaders, but since they know all that will happen, a wise leader will kind of follow what they're told. So that's their lore, and I know leading into seeing the releases, I was wondering how they're going to capture it in their profile, and I think they did a good job, which we'll see in a moment. But before we do, just like to take the moment to quickly say, if you are enjoying these videos, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. It helps me know that people are watching, and as well as it helps the algorithm point more people to the videos, and hopefully they'll find them helpful. If you did want to support the channel financially, there is a link to a Buy Me a Coffee in the description below, as well as a affiliate link to the corvusbelli store. So if you were to be buying something like, for example, the Mounthaven bundle from the corvusbelli store, and you use the affiliate link, it will help support the channel. But with that out of the way, let's jump into the War Augur's profile on the tabletop. As normal, we will start by looking at the basic stats, and we'll see that the War Augur comes in at 25 points, which is, I'd say, a moderate cost, and on the lower end of cost for officers. Speaking of, the War Augur is an officer, and they do bring a command token, which is helpful because there are some very useful command abilities in Mounthaven. As would be expected, given all the other things we've seen, like all the other dwarves, he is 2/2 with a 8 charge. Not very fast, but hey, they have short legs. What is interesting is he comes in with 4 wounds, which is pretty high for a character, and really showing that dwarven durability. He has a good whip of an orange and yellow, and that signature low dwarven morale of 1. He is availability 1, so you will only be able to bring one War Augur in your force. Outside of characteristics of being a character and a dwarf, we do have the keywords of join dwarf infantry, which will allow him to join any dwarven infantry to date, and likely any of the infantry we can expect to see in the first wave of releases. Additionally, he has preferred terrain rugged, which will help allow him to at least keep moving 2/2, even if he has to cross through some rugged terrain that would otherwise slow him. Dwarves really don't want to be slow because being 2/2 is bad enough. Being just moving 2 is very, very rough. Of note, he, even when unattached, does bring a conquest, which means if this guy is walking around, he is actually still contributing to the scenario and scoring, which is pretty handy. So let's look about how well he actually can fight and stuff when he's by himself. When attacking, he has a red, orange, and yellow die, as well as an automatic block. This means that he'll average 2.13 hits with a maximum of 4, going up to 2.63 and a max of 5 if he chooses to stress to add that extra orange. This is okay damage, but there's no switches to make the attack particularly interesting. The guaranteed shield does help keep him alive if he has to swing, but realistically, I don't think you were wanting this guy walking around as a fighting character. It's kind of a nice to have maybe late game if he's left a unit or his unit has died. Defensively, he's pretty solid. He has 2 greens and a black to average 2 blocks with a max of 5, and he can stress to add a blue, pushing that max to 2.5 and a max of 6. This is pretty solid defenses. Although interesting, still no switches to make it more interesting. It's just raw dice. But between this and 4 wounds, he should be able to survive, a lot of hits from, he's not going to take a hit from some of the hardest hitting units in the game and survive, but from some of the more average hitting units, he can probably, especially if he's stressing, survive a hit. When he's unattached, he has 2 abilities. The first one is a command ability called As It Was Written. And this is limited to once per round, and it is during the War Augur's activation. You do not require line of sight, and you just need to target an allied unit within 12 strides. The ability itself will have 2-turn duration. And essentially what it does is once that duration is over, the target gets to activate. So this means at the end of the 2 turns after the War Augur used the ability, that unit will just make a true full activation. This is a very flavorful method of getting extra activations. It's very much capturing the War Augur. They know what's going to happen. They know what the master plan is. They've seen that unit's going to do something in the future, and maybe they advise. So you essentially have to plan ahead as though you, in your mind, know the master plan. So it's a very flavorful way of doing extra activations. Is it less powerful than just saying immediately you activate? Yes. But I like it a lot better. It's more, in my mind, balanced than some of those other abilities. And yeah, it's very flavorful. Now, be aware the enemy can play around it. So for example, if let's say I have my militia, I chose my militia as being able to activate, at the end of 2 turns from now. And let's say my militia before that point they've already activated. Well, now if my opponent attacks them and puts them at their stress cap by winning the combat but doesn't push them back, well, now my militia are sitting engaged, having activated, and at their stress cap, which means now at the end of that duration, I say, okay, they get to activate now, but they're at their stress cap, so they can't, they can't take stress to activate and do a full thing. So the only thing they'd be allowed to do is rest, but they're engaged, so they can't rest. So essentially then this ability would go to waste. So just be aware that your opponent can play against it. And if you're playing against the doors, just think about that. See if maybe you can make it so they've wasted their command token to no benefit by just doing a trick like that. But again, it's a very flavorful, cool way of adding that extra activations, which I do like. Second ability is a passive ability, and of note, it is permanent. So that means that even when attached, he will keep this ability. And it's an interesting one, it's pretty straightforward. You won't need to remember it the whole game. It just says that during the deploy your unit step, so this is during deployment, your opponent must deploy 2 units before proceeding with the usual deployment rules. So this is a lot of words to say. When you go to deploy models, before you start doing the alternating back and forth deployment, your opponent has to deploy 2 units. This is a really cool ability. I always like these types of abilities in games. It just lets you deploy your units with more knowledge about what your opponent's troops are and where they're going to be on the battlefield. Sure, your opponent will still probably drop the least, information giving units first, but it does mean that they'll get to their more interesting units faster in the back and forth deployment. So it gives you additional foreknowledge, which again, it's very cool and flavorful. It's capturing that whole part of the lore that we talked about where the War Augurs know what the enemy troops are, where they're going to be, and all that. So yeah, it's a really cool ability. And again, it's very flavorful, which is honestly my favorite thing in the way they've been doing a lot of these rules. But as I've said, the War Augur can attach, so let's look at him when he's attached. Remember, of course, that I Knew You Were There is still going to be in effect because permanent. When he attaches, he does give his troop an extra orange willpower, which is helpful for keeping them from fleeing, given their low morale, and also will help you with some feat where you need to make willpower rolls. In offense, he gives his unit an extra yellow die, which adds a bit of a boost to their offensive output, and as well, he gives a switch that for a holo special, which holo specials aren't particularly common, but if you do get a holo special, you can cancel a symbol from your target. This is really powerful. It's if you can get it to go off, it's in some ways better than blocking a shield because it can be used to remove different key switches or defensive. So, for example, something like the Shadows of the U, that I believe it's a holo shield for them, counts as 2 blocks. Well, now if you get your holo special, before they can trigger that switch, you can just cancel the holo shield, which normally a lot of things can't usually cancel holo shields. This can. If you cancel that holo shield, it's kind of like stripping 2 blocks. Or if an opponent has a displace, or maybe they're hitting you back. There's a lot of different things, so this is a very good switch if you can manage to roll it. In defense, you gain a black dice, just to help some boost in defense, and you get the same, again, holo switch to remove symbols from your attacker. This is less powerful in defense because generally, the attacker will be resolving their switches first, which means this isn't probably going to be really removing any switches from your opponent because they'll resolve them before you can cancel the symbol that they need. And finally, they give an extra conquest, which is always nice. As we say, scoring points. Scoring points is how you win the game. So anything that can help you hold objectives better is always nice, and the dwarves are already pretty good at that. So this just doubles down on it. Like in his unattached form, the War Augur has 2 abilities when attached, and the first one is very familiar. It is the command ability as it was written. It's the exact same as the unattached form. And since the other unattached ability is permanent, you essentially don't lose anything by attaching him because you're still keeping the same powerful command ability. Realistically, this ultimately sums up to you probably want to just keep him attached, and then if his unit dies, then he can pop out on his own. Secondly, though, he does have a powerful passive ability that he gives his unit when attached. It requires no line of sight and it targets all enemy units. This is to know all the details. It has no range. So yeah, any enemy unit will be this will be applied to, and it says the target cannot add their attack or defense modifiers against you. So essentially, against some enemies, it won't do anything. If your enemy doesn't have a stress to add X die or stress to add X symbols, it won't do anything. But against other enemies that seriously rely on their ability to stress to add modifiers, this will be very, very powerful, both in offense and defense. Some units really rely on stressing to gain key bonuses. One big example of this is the Clouded in the CNN, their cavalry. Their attack dice they only have 3 attack dice, I believe. I think they're like red, red, orange or something like that, or red, orange, orange. But if they stress, I believe they add another red and orange. So their output is significantly different between stressed and unstressed. So being able to say, actually, no, you just can't do that is very good. So yeah, Northern tribes also will find this particularly annoying because they love stressing to really boost their offense and even to punch you back in defense. So yeah, it's a really good ability. But that's the War Augur. Overall, I think my favorite thing about him is just very flavorful unit. Also, that model is just great. I love the glasses. It's so rare that you see a model with just good old glasses on the table. So it's pretty great. He's just writing in his book, making notes on what's going to happen and things like that. So yeah, between the model and the abilities on the model, I think it really captures the lore, which is really cool. As I was saying before, there's not really any reason to not feel him attached to a unit. He doesn't lose anything, and he provides solid buffs to your unit. So really, having him unattached doesn't really make sense. He's even an officer, so he'll die last if your unit starts dying. So really, again, yeah, you probably just keep him in a unit and move on from there. He does bring, as I said, those extra activations, which are always powerful. So right off the bat, that makes him a quite good addition, as well as just being only 25 points and providing good buffs. One really cool thing about him is he rewards players thinking multiple steps ahead, using that extra knowledge on deployment, and also, being able to predict which unit you're going to want to activate in 2 turns. So I think he will reward strong play, which is always really cool, and I'd like to see in models. But those are just my thoughts on the War Augur. I'm sure you have your own, and I'd love to hear them in the comments below. But with that, we've been making good progress for Mounthaven. There are only 3 left, so we'll see you next time, and until then, may the dice be ever in your favor.